Despite many improvements on the macroeconomic front in 2017, the headline-grabbing news on the Sri Lankan economy was on the growth front. GDP growth of 3.1%, down from 4.5% in 2016 and the lowest recorded since 2001, is a cause for some anxiety. First half 2018 GDP estimates of 3.5% suggest that the run of below 4% growth is continuing for a sixth consecutive quarter, albeit with some suggestions of a possible turnaround. On a more positive note, however, the present policy emphasis on productivity enhancements to boost growth can yield sustained and lasting growth. After a shaky start, public finances are in much better shape. The gaping fiscal deficit of 7.6% of GDP in 2015 had narrowed to 5.5% by 2017. In more good news last year, Sri Lanka saw a reversal in fortunes related to two critical areas: exports and foreign direct investment. Export earnings crossed the $11 billion mark and continued to grow by 6.7% in the first half of 2018. FDI inflows recorded a surge to $1.4 billion, while foreign investments into government securities and equity markets have picked up. Thus, after 3 years of underachievement, the economy is being put on a sounder footing to attract private investment and revive growth, and most importantly, accrue benefits to ordinary citizens in the process. But within a narrow growth corridor of around 4%, the Sri Lankan economy remains exposed to rising domestic and external shocks as never before. While the recent bout of lower than expected growth has multiple causes, bad weather and its devastating impacts on agricultural output is partly responsible. Thus, as Sri Lanka's vulnerability to climate shock surge, this year's Sri Lanka State of the Economy report draws attention to climate change, food security and disaster risk management as its thematic focus. Meteorological data indicates a gradual change in climatic parameters, including rising air temperature, erratic changes in the annual pattern of precipitation, a change in the spatial distribution of rainfall, and rising sea levels. The socio-economic impacts of these changes in climate on crop yields, disease and labour productivity amongst others can be far-reaching. Livelihoods in agriculture are most at risk from climate change impacts. The bulk of Sri Lanka's poor are also found in areas heavily dominated by agricultural production. This has brought the problem of food security to the top of the policy agenda. The Global Hunger Index ranks Sri Lanka at 84th position among 119 countries, where its status is classified as serious. Another indication of the rising toll of climate change is the number of people affected by natural disasters. The number of deaths due to natural disasters reached approximately 220 in 2017 alone. Unfortunately, inadequate disaster risk management practices continue to hamper both preventive and recovery efforts in Sri Lanka. Physical infrastructure developments can help protect societies from the economic toll of disasters and the rising tide of climate change impacts. However, if not properly planned, the environmental consequences can be high. As Sri Lanka participates in China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, it must ensure concerns on environmental impacts are addressed, alongside the gains from trade and investment. Meanwhile, as the consequences of climate change become more real in Sri Lanka, it will begin to dictate both outward and inward migration as people flee disaster-prone areas. With rural populations at most risk, rural to urban migration is likely to speed up in Sri Lanka and contribute to the ongoing rapid urbanization processes. With migration, changes to the job market are also imminent. The immediate concern is to cushion the already disproportionate impacts of climate change on workers with low incomes. They are found preponderantly in the rural economy, requiring a great deal of policy focus and spending to improve rural employment markets and safeguard rural workers from income fluctuations. It is also rural, low-income communities that suffer the most after climate-induced calamities. Risk management tools like microinsurance can help households to deal better with shocks and crises of this nature. But the absence of an adequate regulatory mechanism to facilitate microinsurance and its current focus on life cycle rather than livelihood-related shocks have not been very helpful. Furthermore, the low-income households are most at risk from shifting weather patterns that impact on the quality, quantity, accessibility, and affordability of food produced. These in turn have a significant bearing on health and nutrition outcomes. Worryingly, Sri Lanka suffers from a persistent problem of malnutrition. The most recent data available reveals that 20.5% of under 5-year-old children in the country are still underweight. This interwoven matrix of socio-economic factors relating to climate change, discussed in detail in the State of the Economy report, clearly indicates that it is no longer a simple choice between growth and environmental sustainability. Economic growth must remain a central focus. It is only with growth pursued sustainably that the pie becomes bigger to better address growing climate change-related vulnerabilities in the Sri Lankan economy.